Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. I said that we would be back quickly, and we are. So Stephen, myself, and Renee and Elena, our manager of Pack Services, is here with us as well. She was our fourth on the trip. So Elena, we did just want to jump in and talk to you really quick first, because it was your first time into Yellowstone. You did get to see wild wolves. Just tell everybody your feelings and your experiences just from being there in the park with all of us.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so my experience was nothing short of amazing, and it was everything I've ever dreamed of as a little girl. I can't even believe I got to go to Yellowstone. I can't even believe I got to see wild wolves. I did bawl like a baby when I saw them, as my colleagues had witnessed. I don't know. It was incredible to watch them in their natural element and watch their behaviors, learn their little, because you can see their little faces in the scopes. It was just beautiful and amazing, and I hope to do it again. And I don't know. It was nothing short of amazing for me.
What were you feeling then? Like what was bringing on the tears?
I think because it's super overwhelming to see that in person, just because I never thought I would. And it's something I have always dreamed about. And as I get choked up now talking about it, I don't know, it's just overwhelming because you're watching them and they're beautiful and they're happy, and that's what you dream of. It's what I've dreamed of. So I'm glad we started this off with me crying.
I mean, but your emotion speaks to the larger picture of why all these people are there. How did you feel about the people too? Because we met some really amazing individuals there also. The wolves are the main reason, but the people, how did you feel about the people? Because we met these incredible individuals, both who were on the scientific community and also just in the general public. So how was that for you too?
Lots of Steves and Johns.
Yep, tons of Stevens and Johns. That was weird. Every time we said John, 14 guys turned around. It was cute.
John, dude. 3 pairs of Johns and Steves.
Yeah. They were wonderful. And the passion that they have and the excitement on their faces, and they were caring and sharing. They let us look through their scopes. We were just, bullshitting about wolves. It was just, I loved every minute of it. And it was like the shortest, longest trip of my life. I wish we were still there, but, just to get it, I guess for the first trip, it was great. And then to meet these wonderful people and the biologists and the scientists, and they're so passionate and they've dedicated their lives to this. And I just think when you see that in other people, it's like I don't know, you feel like familiar. You feel like I've known you forever. We're the same. We're cut from the same cloth, pretty much. So that was super exciting for me to meet all those people and still keep in touch with them because, I don't know, we're just on the same wavelength, and it's really special for me.
Yeah. No, I think you echoed everything we said in the first part of this, which is great. And that's, we wanted to bring you in as we have cats in the background. Steven, it's always an adventure with Steven's house. So we wanted to bring you in because we didn't have you in the first part, and you were there, and you were a vital part of, all 4 of us played a really huge part of having this great experience. And we just wanted to get your perspective, and you'll be part of this conversation as well as we go through. But so Stephen and I, before we started, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say it's for fresh eyes, because I never thought I would be able to do what I do at Wolf Connection for a living, put it that way. So everybody else comes from different paths, and, maybe like Renee trained on this. She did this for her life. John and I always wanted to be veterinarians when we were little, and that it just life took a weird course. And then to be able to do this as a job and to make it your life, I just think that's, I never thought this would be what I'm doing, and I am. So I just want to share that to other people who think that, maybe they aren't on that path yet, but it's there if you want it. So you never know. # you never know.
No, it's true. It's totally true. So Stephen and I were talking right before we jumped on about a couple of topics that, and obviously we're gonna share mics here. So apologize for that in advance, but it'll be fun because there'll be 4 of us here. But Renee had taken notes, Elena had taken notes, Stephen, we had notes. So we do want to talk about, we left off with sort of this cycle about when we were on this hike and we were seeing all these bones, which again, thank you to the individuals who took us out there to do that. And it really brought up this amazing point of the swing in the ungulate population that has occurred since wolves have been introduced back into Yellowstone. Renee and Steven, I think you have the notes, but there was something, I think, to the degree of 20 to 25 to 1 elk to bison, meaning that for every 20 to 25 elk, there was one bison. Now in the park, roughly 25 or 30 years later, it's 1 to 3. In other words, 1 elk to 3 bison. So that shift in the ungulate population has swung majorly in the other direction. And there was a lot of information that we were learning from the individuals we were with that some of these packs are actually starting to possibly learn from the mollies, which is the one that is in the southernmost part of the park, who have killed bison since they've really been introduced, that some of these other animals are breaking off and learning how to do that. So if you guys want to share what you were learning there and any things you want to jump in, please go ahead and do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was kind of it's strange how nature's timing works, is what I was thinking the whole time we were hearing the story, because you're talking about many layers of ecosystems, and some of the ways we have to handle overpopulation are controversial, especially in national parks. Like, for example, the bison have to be culled by I assume by state management, paid for by taxpayers, and a lot of it's because migrating bison aren't super tolerated, I think, outside the park, and the park isn't big enough in that valley to house that many bison, but it does house a lot more than probably is the appropriate carrying capacity. And it's funny to hear that this one wolf pack, the Mollies, who sort of retained their Canadian reintroduction size, were, it makes sense. They were the specialists. They were specializing in bison, whereas other wolf packs were specializing in elk. And now there's the elk population is taken somewhat of a hit. The bison population is probably exceeding carrying capacity to some degree. And now you find that the Mollies, having been so successful, are now having puppies, obviously, and that ancestral wisdom is being passed down through young, and therefore penetrating the other wolf packs in the park. So right as the bison herds are kind of exceeding their carrying capacity, wolves could potentially be targeting bison more often, because not only do they have the potentially the knowledge, the specialty, but also now there's more of them, so a much larger resource. The elk may be harder to come by. So it was interesting to hear that this might give the elk a break, or there's a concept called, I believe it's apparent predator mediated competition or something like that, where something could come up where wolves start targeting bison, therefore they're becoming so successful that once they cull the herd of bison, they start disproportionately targeting elk. And so it'll be interesting to see how this turns out, in this movie-esque fashion that we just watch unfold and see how nature deals with it. But I think the bison are having negative impacts on the landscape. You imagine that many animals that big just roaming and trampling and eating, and not a whole lot of critters or people, for that matter, to manage.
Yeah, definitely. I could speak just from myself. I've been to the park a few times before this last trip. My last time was a couple years ago, and I remember driving into the park, and then all we saw was bison. And I remember having this feeling of like, whoa, like something's a little off here. Like everything is bison and there's nothing else, So I remember feeling that internal shock in a way, that I didn't quite know exactly what it was. And so it wasn't until the next day that when we spoke to other individuals and they shared those numbers that you guys mentioned of how many more bison there are versus the elk. And it is such a fascinating, it seems like a very new thing that's been happening. The biologists are just now starting to, probably not just now, but like they've been in the beginning stages of studying like what is happening, why is it happening, and how is it going to be righted? How is it going to be able to find balance? And I'm sure on their own, they're trying to figure out what are the human interventions that might need to take place in the park, and then the others of being able to study the wolves. What a cool thing, just 2 years ago, it was still known that it was only the mollies that were the bison killers, because they retained a larger body percentage. They lived in the southernmost part of the park, which has deeper snow. So the only prey they had down there was bison during the winter. So they had that specialized skill. And now to hear that there's 4 packs that are actually able to kill bison, and the biologists sharing that, these packs tend to, they might leave their natal pack and join another pack and be adopted in. And with that, they're bringing those skills with them. So there's this coevolution that different packs are having together, that they might already naturally be finding balance in a way for the park. And what a cool thing. And then also the fact that, right now the Junction Butte is 35 strong. I know they kind of split. So there's like 27 on one side and a few on the other, but the yearlings kind of hop back and forth, enjoying the spoils of both sides. The Wapitis, I think, are not too far behind in numbers. So then you're also looking at, the numbers of packs. You have more mouths to feed, you need more food. And of course, bison being so much larger provide, more sustenance for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that brings up a cool point that potentially predators, I think specifically we're talking about wolves, obviously, they'll help to manage this issue and maybe take some of the pressure off of the human beings who are really confused about what to do. As I was reading an article, and it's hard to just start letting bison leave the park. So they're trying to contain them so that they stay there. They don't go onto private properties outside of the park. But I think ideally they do want. When I say they, I mean I think there's like state legislators, Congress, some representatives from Congress, and the members of the interagency bison management that are, I think, trying to work together to figure out how to, I guess, helping local communities learn to coexist with bison herds. Because you got to think, I mean, these critters are massive. You're talking about hundreds of animals, all weighing, I'm sure, several thousand pounds, walking through your backyard, which is going to do some damage to some properties. And I think as I was reading this article, they are hoping that hunting outside of the park will become a more successful management tool, because in the end, these bison will be culled. It's just a matter of whether hunters are paying into the system of conservation to hunt them, or whether we as taxpayers are paying state management to hunt them. But they will be culled because biologists know the important science. So hopefully, as we use this word a lot when it comes to wolves and what they're able to offer. Hopefully it will provide some kind of balance, but it's really cool that it's even an option and that maybe it's swinging in that direction.
Yeah, it really just goes to show how when we have these discussions that both sides are really trying to work towards a happy medium, or a medium, I won't say happy, but just a medium of how we can manage these species, ethically and in a way that isn't going to swing again the pendulum either side of the other.
Yeah.
All three of us can really speak to the fact, Renee talking about the amount of bison. I mean, any of you want to jump in? I mean, we got caught on a bison jam, I think, on day one. And it was just incredible to see them coming down the slope and going across this bridge. I mean, if anyone want to jump in and talk about that, because it really speaks to the amount, and it was prevalent on day two, because we saw a lot, a good amount of elk on day one. And then on Sunday, Stephen and I were noticing as we're driving towards the park that really, I mean, the elk seemed to have disappeared, or maybe they were heading up to their summer range. Not exactly sure if that's accurate or not. Yeah. So, yeah, but the bison were still there. So I think just what was that like for you all when we were in the park and we were in this bison gym and we see them coming down the hill? And it's just, to me, I was just awestruck again by
the bridge scene.
The bridge, it really was a bridge scene in a movie. So yeah, if you guys want to jump in about anything that you were feeling in that moment, it was cool. It really was. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think for me, watching that happen, I've never been to Africa. I've never been on a safari, but I've only watched, documentaries growing up as a little kid. And watching that mass migration, you see that wildebeest have and zebra have. And it's like, that's the only thing that I can compare it to, because it was so epic in the amount of bison that were in this massive herd that came trampling down this huge hillside in a massive cloud of dust. And it was such a contrast of dramatic scenery, because we were in the park so early. So how the sun was shining with the dust flaring, it was cold, so the breath of the bison was visual. And then you just funneled onto this massive bridge that was hundreds of feet, above the river below. We were there for a while watching them, make their way, and, they're bison. You're not going to make them move unless they want to move. So you just have to wait until they clear out. But it couldn't have felt more wild than that, just being surrounded by the bison and just watching them do what they do.
I felt like I was part of the Kevin Costner Yellowstone series for a moment. But I think I got him some good footage to send. Kevin, if you're listening, I'll send you some footage. It was pretty incredible. It did feel wild. It felt...
He's definitely listening.
Nature. I know he is. It felt like really in touch with nature at that moment. We just all kind of stopped and stared, and it was really incredible. It's one of the moments I will never forget.
Yeah, it was one of the weirdest scenes I've ever filmed in my life, because hopefully we'll get that video up soon, actually, because that'd be a cool video to show. But they're just coming down this super steep grade, and I'm filming them up there. It looks like this wild American Serengeti vibe, and then all of a sudden they just hit this bridge, and there's cars and and this steel bridge, and it just changes the vibe immediately. It was eerie in some way. I don't know if you guys felt that. It was awesome, but there was something like Planet of the Apes-ish about it. Yeah. That's what I kept thinking.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and you're right, because when they're crossing the bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, you're like, whoa, this whole you said, a mass migration of these huge animals just going in one direction across this bridge. And yeah, you're right, the landscape around you, and it goes down below into this river, and you go, there is a shot that something treacherous could happen, but they did navigate and get across. And it's interesting to see how they as a group, as a herd, are able to funnel themselves in a way that they're protecting themselves. They're making sure that every animal is safe, and they get their way across the bridge. It was just a very cool. Yeah, it is. It was an awesome experience to see that. But taking back to the point is that there's a ton of them, and they're everywhere. I think every stop that we looked for grizzly bear, when we were looking at the den for the Junction Butte den, there were minimum half a dozen to a dozen bison just to our left, to our right, straight ahead, and just sort of meandering across. So they were everywhere. Everywhere we were, once you got probably like a mile or so into the park, roughly.
And there was one point when I was looking through another John's scope, where we were like in the middle of, I don't know, we were on some mound somewhere. I don't know the landscape words. But anyway, I'm looking through the scope, and there's
landscape
like a dead
words.
tree. And he's like, do you want to see a bald eagle? And I was like, move over. Yes, I do. So I looked through the thing, and there's a it was like out. It was a perfect photo, which I didn't get, but it's in my brain.
Oh, right.
So if you guys can see that, there's a dead tree, and there's a bald eagle facing away from me, and there's a bison on the bottom right, just like grazing, and the eagle turns, and I was like, it's burned in my brain. Like, it was just so beautiful. But again, there was a bison there. I didn't look down. I looked down, and I was like, wow, that they are everywhere.
Yeah.
Just to tie it in.
Yeah.
No,
There's
yeah.
a whole herd under that eagle.
Yeah, and that was interesting too, especially when we got the privilege to go on that massive multi-mile hike down treacherous, hills and ice and through a marshland. especially where, we start going down this hill and there's just like tons of bison in this one area and there's tons on the hill over there. It's like everywhere you look, there is more bison than anything else. And walking around this marsh to go look at another carcass, it was challenging to actually walk on the ground because of how much the bison have moved through there. So you're either stepping in a huge hole from their hooves or you're stepping in a giant pile of poo,
dung,
which is massive. And so it felt more, it felt more difficult to traverse a landscape. And like you had said, Stephen, it's already visible of what the numbers of bison are doing to the landscape. And over time, that's going to start causing erosion problems and waterway problems. And I can only imagine, more.
Yeah, I think the state of Montana and certain Native American tribes actually have proposed hunting bison within the park, which is obviously not that's not a very normal thing for national parks, but they have proposed it because for obvious reasons. If locals can eat it, if locals can find abundance in a herd of animals that needs to be culled for really the betterment of the ecosystem there, and it's a very unique ecosystem where it's just kind of it's collected in this one spot, so there's a lot affecting that one spot, and I think folks have proposed that, and I can't see that ever happening, but I think a lot of folks see this as a problem that needs to be sorted in another way than we've been sorting it. So, I'm interested. Maybe we're all on the same page with that, but I'm definitely interested to see how that turns out.
I think we brought it up last time. The last previous is that you're talking about this place, Yellowstone, where Renee, you said it, and we've heard it a couple of times. It's a blessing and a curse. Is that there is this stabilized ecosystem that is managed to somewhat more of a human degree, where humans sort of manage this more so than anywhere else. I think if you went into Montana or even in the depths of Wyoming, I'm interested to see in the future about how these management plans work in terms of bison and elk and wolves, now that wolves are going to be reintroduced in Colorado. And it's going to be, the challenges I think are going to be how we can strike this balance that people see in Yellowstone. And if I would think nature is going to be able to take its own course and do its own job. And we've seen that. I think if you leave nature to do its thing, wolves are not going to overbreed themselves. If there's no food, they're not going to sit there and eat up all of the, they're not going to breed. They're just not going to have pups.
Yeah.
Because of, if I don't have enough food to feed the mouths that I'm going to birth, it's not going to work out. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of these groups outside of Yellowstone are going to try and find these coexistence management programs where we let nature take its course with us doing our part by doing those non-lethal methods and things of that sort. It's just interesting how the conversation sort of flips its script around, because there's so many wild places that are out in the West that aren't in a national park, that we have to see how it all unfolds.
Right, exactly. And it's funny because we always talk about coexistence with wolves, but really the conversation is going to open up to a lot of animals at some point, because we're encroaching on so much habitat that there's really not that many places left on the edge of wild places where you're not going to have migration routes, herds of this animal or that animal, predators. So these conversations are going to go beyond wolves at some point. And I think maybe bison in Montana could be one of the next challenges for coexistence, because there's really only a few solutions. And one of those would be to increase the tolerance of migrating bison outside the park so that they could disperse more. Because in reality, the best management tool, one of the best management tools they have out there is humans harvesting wild game. But that can't happen in the park for probably some good reasons too. You know what I mean? Like it would cause all of these animals in the park to act completely different. Whether that's good or bad really depends on who you are. But I think the visitor experience would change drastically because these animals would start having much more predator pressure. So I don't know if there's a great solution, but there's definitely other ones, but they'll again require human tolerance.
And I think too, I want to, because this I think dives into how many wolves are actually in the park. Because I think we're talking about population numbers, and I know we were talking with some of our friends and colleagues that we met in the park, and individuals who study them, and it's incredible that the number rarely goes above 100. And I know the reason they're able to, I guess, sustain that number. And Renee or Steve or Elena, if you guys remember exactly, I know we had it written down.
Mm-hmm.
It was something to the effect, and I am not the best one to explain it, but it's birth, emigration, and death emigration in the year for the population number. But I think that's, I guess, the amount of wolves that are coming in, that are birthed.
I think you were right about the 100. I think it's less than 100 wolves in the actual park, but I think in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, I think that's upwards of like 500 and change.
Yeah, I think what we heard when we were there is like the head count at the end of last year of 2020 was 135 wolves in the park. Normally it's about 100.
Mm-hmm.
I think their biggest they ever had, and I don't know what date, what year it was 170, but that's pretty rare. It usually wavers around that 100 mark. I mean, I could speak from, the last few times that I had gone over the last 6 years. It was definitely like, we have 101, we have 106, we have 98. Like, it definitely kind of stayed in that range a lot. And then it is just kind of that ebb and flow of, the birth rate and then the survival of pups. Because last I had heard, pups only have a 50% survival rate to make it to 1 year of age in the park, at least. As far as outside of the park, I'm not totally sure. But when they have distemper come through and things like that, it's a little harsh on the population. But then there is some kind of balance with that, because then you have the elder wolves that pass, or you have wolves that are injured. So there's that balance of that birth and death rate in the year.
Yeah, and I think Elena, jump in here too, because when we did get an opportunity when we were at Slough Creek, because that was the den site for the Junction Butte Pack, and we're keeping on this topic, but just when things pop into my brain, I got to say it, is that we saw, because we've all worked here at Wolf Connection for a long time, and it's amazing the dynamics inside the Junction Butte that we saw, that we can relate to some of the dynamics that we see in our captive pack here. And it was funny that all of us at different points were saying, well, there's a Daisy, or there's a Bodie, or there's whoever, or somebody, some sort of, I have a still shot actually after we found that elk kill, that there were 2 bison to the right, and there was, I got the shot, and it's far away, but there's 2 wolves. One has them in a submission, like the tail's up and in a submission hold. And it's just funny to see these dynamics play out in the park from miles away. But it was cool, like, to see those, like, you saw them. Yeah.
Well, I mean, because you can see them playing too. That was like so adorable to watch them play.
Bunch of daisies, yeah.
A bunch of daisies, a bunch of kenais. We were like, oh, and definitely a coda was in there. I was like, wow, even though, it's far away, but you can still tell. And their little playful tails, and just, there was so much play. I love that part though, especially when we went to the denning area, and they were just like bouncing around, like playing with each other. And then one's laying over there, one's laying with us, like they're sunbathing. It was just, of course, our pack does that too. It's just, it's out in a park, a national wild park. That's all.
Yeah. And I mean, Stephen, you love the fact that there was the elk sheds there too at the den site, which was incredible to see that they had brought those elk sheds. And it was, I mean, these were fair. I mean, at least 6 to 8 points on these racks that they had there, and they're just playing with them, tossing them around. And it's funny to see those play pouncing behaviors. It was really funny.
Yeah, it's cool because I'm probably assuming, but I could assume that they didn't kill all of those ungulates right outside their den. So the fact that there's this horde of antlers just implies that they're just playing. You know, they're doing things just to play, and that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and that's that's a perfect segue for what I was about to say, Stephen, is that, we see that behavior in our animals with what they have in their natural habitats here at the ranch. Like we actually have Nolly, who is wolf and coyote mix, so she's an interesting creature in our pack. But literally what you just said of getting all those elk sheds and the antlers and kind of making a pile, in their space, Nolly does that with her sticks in her habitat. And she'll kind of shift whatever her favorite spot is in the habitat, and she'll just all of a sudden there's like a pile of sticks in one spot. And it's not by us, it's completely by her making whatever her playground is in her habitat. And, just witnessing their behaviors, I think that was also the biggest thing that I took away from even my first time going to Yellowstone, is that, seeing these animals in the wild in their natural habitat, expressing natural behaviors. And of course, here at Wolf Connection, our captive pack has to be captive. They can't be in the wild. They weren't taken from the wild, so they have to be in a forever sanctuary. And our absolute top goal is to give them the best life possible. And that is through giving them opportunities to express their natural behaviors. And I remember witnessing the wolves. I'm getting chills on my arms just thinking about it. The first time, and every single time I've been back, and being able to name our pack that we're seeing expressed in the wild wolves, is that it just goes to show that no matter what humans try to do, try to breed wolf dogs, try to make them pets, try to have them in a zoo, try to have them as an attraction or whatever. I mean, in our pack, they haven't seen a wild ancestor in goodness knows how many generations, yet it still lives within them. That no matter how much you try to put these animals in a box or say that this is how they act and this is what they do, and someone writes it in a book. I remember someone told me my first trip is that, the funny thing about wolves is they don't read. The moment someone writes something in a book that this is what wolves do, one wolf in the wild goes and does the complete opposite of it. And it's incredible to see how our
Right.
pack, that even though people have tried to make them fit into the human world, fit them into a domestic environment, they're still wolves.
Right, and they do retain some amount of that. I mean, Renee, you've been around horses probably much longer than I have, but I feel like horses and wolves are similar in that way, where they, no matter what you do with them, they retain some amount of that supernatural behavior. That's what makes them cool. But what do you personally, do you think there's got to be something different about the way coyotes and wolves think? Because I don't know. I camped. I tell you guys this before too, but I don't think I've ever said it on the podcast. But when I used to camp on the East Knoll at the property, I would just hear Nolly only doing stuff, and I just couldn't figure out what stuff she was doing. But she was always doing
Redecorating.
stuff that didn't seem to have any purpose other than just for fun. And I would bring my higher powered flashlight up there so that I could see them from far away, just to see what they were doing. And I would just shine the flashlight on her, and she would always just be, I don't know what she was doing. She would be on top of the house just messing with stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be a coyote thing. I don't know if I've seen the wolves do that as much.
It's funny you say, I mean, it's amazing. When we go to feed her every morning, it seems as though, Elena, because you said it before as Stephen was talking, she just redecorates. She gets bored with something and she goes, well, I'm going to change the drapes, or I'm going to, dig another hole. It just seems that she does that.
She might be a Gemini.
She could, it's possible. But remember too, when we were in the park and we saw, when we described on the first part, the coyote ripping through, but we were on the side of the road, right? And how different we were watching bison, and I think there was a grizzly and a cub in the distance, and that's why we initially pulled over. Yeah. And these two white, or it looked like white, lightish figures started trotting towards. I immediately would go, there's wolves, they're wolves that are coming straight ahead. And once we scoped up, we're like, I think
they're
Renee.
large. They look like wolves.
They look from a distance, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think either
big.
you. I think Renee goes, nope,
She's
just
like, "Oh,
coyotes.
okay."
But they.
Yeah.
It's amazing how they acted in that little moment because they just sort of trotted through, didn't really pay any mind to anybody else that was there, and they just sort of disappeared into the sage. So I just found it interesting that they took. I mean, they're pretty ballsy animals that they just sort of were like, oh, we're just going to meander through. Yeah, they are. They're very savvy. Thank you. Probably better word to use.
Yeah, but didn't they go up to the left? You know, they were heading that way, and then they started yipping. They were like, "Wolves are coming! Wolves
Yeah,
are
they
coming!"
do.
Like that's what it's at. You know, not you know they don't say that, but we're like, yeah. We were like, "Oh, that's a
I heard
coyote.
them-
They're definitely yipping."
I heard them
but-
actually saying that.
right? I
them
heard
saying
one of them
that,
through the scope. You know, but
Yeah,
then
I heard them through the
five,
scope. Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
a minute later, you know,
Yeah.
yip, 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 and then the elk were like, "Huh?" And then the wolves came down.
Yeah.
You know, it was incredible to
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think there is a difference in the coyote, and I can't speak upon it too much, but it was noticeable to see how the wolves, you know, react and the wolves go through the park as opposed to the coyotes. And again, I hope again, first of many times I'm there to witness this stuff. But yeah, it was definitely cool. It was definitely cool to see that. And yes, there is a difference, I think, in even with the ones we have here, the two that we have here with Ayasha and Nali, how they act.
We should do a podcast on not coyotes because they're not true wolves, but just when you guys were talking about Nolly there, I was thinking that would be a really cool podcast to talk about the common ancestry and where they kind of split off and what makes them different. And it's also interesting, speaking of coyotes, sort of how in the days where commercial market hunting was still a thing, they just got through it. There's good reason why wolves didn't maybe, and why coyotes were able to sort of thrive in all these different climates and environments. But that's a cool critter, man. I was actually equally happy to have seen those two white coyotes passing through that bison herd like that.
Yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, somebody said on our trip, or it was right before, that when that hunting was still, again, they can still be hunted, is their population actually exploded because of it, because they were figuring out ways to avoid. And so they were just breeding at an abnormal rate to keep the populations up. And actually the hunting was an adverse effect to trying to cull or get rid or eliminate or exterminate coyotes, because they are, I believe,
and it still could be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating, all the things that we're learning, and things just keep popping up. I don't know about the rest of you. Just after we left, it just seems like every day something different sticks in my brain, and I'm scrolling through my phone and I'm thinking about the different experiences and the different. And again, I always go back to the people too, because it was just it was really such a welcoming environment. And I know I said this the first time, but it was just a very different bubble to be in of, you know, people and biologists and wolf watchers and tour guides, and the familial aspect that was there, that I believe translates into what we see with wolf packs, is that they're a family. I heard a couple people who were looking through our scopes, who were just driving by, they stopped and they go, "Oh, what are you guys looking at?" And we let them look at our scopes. And it's just that, they look like they're just being a family. And it's really like, that's such a real thing, I think, to drive home, is that this is a species that, among all other things, really cares for one another in their own pack. And it was just cool to see that correlation between human and wolf when we were there for that short period of time.
Well, it was like meeting family members you didn't know you had in a different place of the world, you know? And then think about who else we haven't met, you know? When we keep traveling and looking for other people that are like-minded and have the same passion.
Yeah. I think it's such a great point to bring home. I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the. I think there was one other thing. I know we touched on the bison and we touched on the packs, and I think as we close this part of it, and this will be our part 2. So we'll sort of wrap this up. And what are you all taking, I think, from this I think the one thing, first of all, again, I'll just say thank you to everybody who is listening, who was there, to the restaurants and the shops and everybody who is making a living up there in Gardner and doing their thing and really showed us to be, to welcome us in was great. But what I found fascinating is really just the shift that we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, is just that there is this huge shift in bison elk. There are these other packs they're now going to evolve, because some of these wolves are breaking away from the Mollies and the Junction Buttes, and we may actually get to see we may see the same numbers of wolves, but the pack size could be completely different. We could see maybe some of the smaller packs get absorbed into these larger packs, where we only have 4 or 5 packs. I think right now there's 8 or 10. I think 10. There's 10, but they're a little bit smaller.
Yeah, they're currently, I was just looking at the notes. Also earlier I said there's 135 wolves at the end of last year. It was 123. So apologies to any biologists that I got your numbers wrong, but I did correct it with my notes.
That's
123.
That's right.
But it was shared that there is currently 9 packs, 10 if you count 1154. It's a alpha female that split off from the Junction Butte. There's a few members. I think one 8 Mile joined them as well. And it was interesting to hear because, some of our colleagues that were out there were like, well, we'll see. I mean, we're just calling them 1154 because that's her radio collar. But, if they successfully have pups next year, then they'll essentially earn their own name as their own pack. So that was fascinating to hear, what their observations are with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Stephen, what's the thing that that you are going to take from this, the first experience? Because again, this will not be the last.
Well, I obviously had a slightly different experience than you three because I was able to drive from Colorado to Montana. So I was able to I met several new people that I'd never met before. I stayed with a few people that I had never met before and had some of these conversations with them. And really what it comes down to is it's clear that most people have a very balanced and critically thought out perspective about their points of view. And the extremes and the polarization in some of these conversations is not going to be helpful for anybody. And that there's political motivation involved in this and misconceptions about groups and painting groups with a broad brush. And all that leads to is groups feeling isolated, ignored, and resentful. And, it's obvious that we can't be so quick to ignore each other, to ignore humans. For the sake of even animals that we love, because it's clear that we need each other to collaborate, to cooperate, to make any real headway. And that means that we need to include everyone's point of view. And that means pro-wolf folks, hunters, ranchers, at every turn of this conversation, because they all want the same thing. And the truth is that ranchers are protecting that outer layer of wilderness from commercial interests, the places that we all love to experience. So in their own way, whether they like wolves or not, they're helping to protect wildlife, and they're helping to protect wolves, really. And they're giving opportunities for habitat for wolves. And same with hunters. I mean, I don't think a lot of people know this, but hunter tax dollars are what pay for a lot of these conservation projects. So to paint these groups with broad brushes is really just damaging to our psyches as human beings who are collaborating on this planet, and also not so helpful for the critters and the landscape.
Elena, what about you? What are you taking away?
For me, I think it was more wolf aspect, getting to see them in a natural habitat and all that. It's just, I don't know, it's beautiful to watch, and the people part as well, because I'm always a big fan of meeting. I mean, they don't necessarily have to be like-minded, but it was very nice to find. I don't know. It's like how I feel about the people here. It's like a different part of my family. So that was wonderful for me. I think about them every day. I'm glad we friended them, and we can be lifelong friends, I hope. Just because it's a shared interest, and it's just comfortable, and it's nice, and you can have intelligent conversations about it, and everybody's got their opinion. That's great. But the passion that I saw and the connection was really lovely.
Yeah.
for me.
Yep. We're gonna have to get creative with our contact books though, because there's gonna be a lot of Steves and Johns.
Yeah, we'll have to work on code names for that
Gotta
one.
put last names from now on.
Yeah, for me, I think it, nature and animals create this common ground for people to connect over. Like I said, I've been to the park just a handful of times over the last few years, and each time I meet somebody new, and at the same time, I still see old people that I met from the time before, and there's like recognition and checking in how each other are doing, even though, we haven't spoken to each other in 2 years. Yeah, we're able to jump right back into it when we see each other again in the park. And I think that was such an experience is you have all these people lined up with scopes and cameras and things, and we're watching a den site, yet to see the connection of the people sharing what they saw the day before and having such pure, authentic interest in each other's stories and the amount of airdropping that happened from people's phones that like we don't even know each other, but we're sharing photos, we're sharing videos just to like see this cool stuff and share the experience. We had the pleasure of having a potluck dinner at a colleague's house with other people we met as well. And I think that was the fascinating conversation that was happening is that on the outside, in a broad way, it looked like we were all there for the wolves. But when it came down to it, we all had something else to bring to the table, whether it was a different animal that was more our quote unquote heart animal or the passion behind why we wanted to be near the wolves or, wolves and cougars or birds or grizzlies or elk or marmots, or otters, it was just amazing to see how it blossomed into it's wolves and more. It's wolves and it's everything. It's wolves and it's everyone. And that hits deep for me.
Yeah, I echo all of what you three have said. And again, I think the experience, and I hope we did a good enough job to convey what we all experienced here in this wonderful park. And I think if you get the opportunity to go there, you will meet some incredible people. And here's hoping that you get to witness some amazing animals, whether it's grizzly or bison or elk or pronghorn, eagles, hawks, wolves, whatever it is. And I think it's a beautiful conversation that, again, we're going to continue to have, but it was just, we wanted to give all of you out there an opportunity to listen to what we experienced, what we got from it, and it'll stick with us for a long time. So again, thank you, Stephen, Elena, Renee. Thank you guys for just coming on. And thank you guys for being part of the trip. This was great.
Hey, this is my first podcast, so thanks everybody. Thanks for listening.
Yo. Any random like one-liner facts that you guys remember hearing? I was just thinking of one. Who would have known that white-tailed deer, or who would have thought it, I guess, that white-tailed deer were the rarest animal in Yellowstone? Any other one-liners you guys remember like that people might be interested in?
Steven stole mine.
My other was
how
bison have their own funeral ritual for those that pass. And they commented how they're, it's very much like elephants and how each bison will go to a carcass and in a way do their own moment with the carcass and move on.
That was crazy.
And that hit me because I remember the first time I went there about, 5 years ago, and a biologist had told me that bison of North America are our elephants, essentially. Like they are the elephants, they are the wisdom keepers, they are the ancestors of our land. So hearing that was, I'm about to cry.
That was cool. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
I remember 1154 being one of the oldest ones, I think, one of the eldest female alpha, or just like one of the oldest wolves they've ever seen. I think she's like 10 plus. 1154, because I remember she's white with the collar and all that. So I remember being like, wow, that's a hell of a life, girl. I mean, you're doing good. You know what I mean? Like, rock on.
I'll just The one thing I remember, I think I wrote this down, or Renee wrote this down, or somebody wrote this down, but the amount of elk, it's basically, I think it's an elk, 1.5 elk per wolf per month is what they ingest. And when you think about the size of an elk, let's just say it's rounded up to 1,000 pounds. If it's a big elk, it's 1,000 pounds or something like that. And a wolf is maybe 100, maybe it's 100 pounds, probably, anywhere between 80 and 90. Just think about the amount of consumption that happens just per wolf for that animal. And it's just insane the amount of, meat that's able to be consumed, that they're able to handle, they're able to traverse with all of this meat, either whether it's back to a den site, whether it's to lay down, whether it's to digest. And just the amount that they need to continue to move is fascinating for such a smaller predator. And I don't know, I found that fascinating. That was something that
Can't they eat up to 20 pounds a day?
Yeah, they can eat up to.
I believe one of the guys said that.
I think in one sitting.
One sitting, yeah.
One sitting,
20 pounds a day.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's a
For
lot.
their lean little bodies, not little, but lean bodies that are just, constantly in motion. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And they're marathon runners, man. They can go 40, 50 miles at a clip, which is awesome. I think that's great for us to end on. Thank you all for listening. We did. Stephen loves to say that. We did it. We got there. We're going back. So we'll keep you all posted on that. But keep checking out Wolf Connection socials for any videos, photos. We're all going to, go through all of our stuff, and you'll be getting a slow drip. It'll be really great stuff. So thank you guys for following along on the trip. Always, hashtag Wolf Connection. Go to wolfconnection.org. Any of the wolves that we spoke about here today, if you guys want to take a look at them, Nolly, Daisy, Kenai, our entire pack, go on wolfconnection.org, check them out. Howls to all of you out there, and we'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the donate tab, and find out more information.